I was standing in the hallway of our house, holding a check for $850,000, when I heard my husband say, "She'll sign the papers before the end of the week. By Friday, we move everything into the account, and she'll never know the difference." My son laughed quietly and said, "You really think she won't notice?" My husband said, "She trusts me completely. She always has." I stopped breathing. I had just come home early from the closing. 35 years of teaching third grade, and the house we bought with my teacher's pension and my summers working part-time had just sold for more than I ever imagined possible. The real estate agent had hugged me in the parking lot. She said, "Margaret, you should celebrate tonight." I drove home smiling. I was thinking about the small cottage my husband and I had talked about buying near the lake. I was thinking about waking up slowly, having coffee without an alarm, finally reading all the books stacked on my nightstand. Instead, I was frozen at the front door, listening to the two men I loved most in this world talk about my money like it was already theirs. I had left the closing appointment 40 minutes early. The title company finished the paperwork faster than expected. My husband Daniel thought I would be gone for at least another hour. My son, Christopher, was 24 and had been staying with us for the past 2 months after losing his apartment lease. Daniel spoke again, his voice lower now. "Once she transfers into the joint account like we discussed, I'll move it to Victor's fund. Victor said the window closes in 2 weeks. This is our one shot." Victor. My stomach dropped at that name. Victor was Daniel's college friend who had resurfaced 8 months ago after 20 years of silence. He had started a company, or so he said. He talked about investments, returns, opportunities. Every time his name came up at dinner, I had changed the subject politely because something about the man made the back of my neck feel cold. Christopher's voice was quieter now, less sure. "Dad, are you certain about Victor? I mean, $800,000 is a lot too. It doubles in 14 months, Daniel said flatly. Victor showed me everything. The projections, the accounts, the client results. This is not a risk. This is a certainty. Christopher went quiet, and so did I. My hand was still on the door handle. The check was in my purse. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm on the porch steps. Inside, the life I thought I understood was dissolving like sugar in water. I made a decision in that moment that surprised even me. I stepped back quietly onto the porch, pulled the door shut without a sound, and sat down on the front steps. My hands were shaking, but my mind was very clear. I was not going to walk in there and cry. I was not going to wave that check in the air and demand answers. I was going to think, because here is what 35 years of managing a classroom full of 8-year-olds teaches you. When things feel out of control, the most powerful thing you can do is slow down. I sat on those steps for 11 minutes. I counted them. Then I stood up, put a smile on my face, opened the door loudly, and called out, "I'm home." The closing finished early. Chairs scraped the kitchen floor. Daniel appeared in the doorway first, his smile wide and practiced. "Sweetheart, already? How did it go?" Christopher stood just behind him. His eyes looked a little too bright, the way they used to look when he was 7 years old and had broken something and was waiting to see if I noticed. I held up my purse. "It went perfectly. I have the check." Daniel reached forward and hugged me. "It lasted 1 second too long." "That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful, Margaret." Christopher hugged me next. His arms were tight and real. I noticed that. We sat at the kitchen table and I told them about the closing, the handshakes, the paperwork. I watched their faces while I talked. Daniel asked twice how quickly we could transfer the funds into our shared account. Both times I said, "I'm not sure yet. I want to talk to our financial advisor first." Both times he nodded and smiled and said, "Of course, of course." That night, I waited until Daniel was asleep. Then I went to the kitchen, opened my laptop, and searched Victor's company name. What I found took my breath away. There were 3 complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau. 2 people in a forum had posted about wiring money and never seeing returns. 1 woman in Ohio had written a detailed account of losing $60,000. The company had been registered 18 months ago in a state with minimal financial oversight. Victor's name did not appear in any legitimate investment registry. It was a scam. A well-dressed, well-spoken, confident scam aimed at people who had just come into money. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. The next morning I called my financial advisor before Daniel woke up. Her name is Patricia. and she has managed my retirement accounts for 11 years. I spoke quietly near the kitchen window with my coffee getting cold beside me. Patricia, I said, I need to move the proceeds from my home sale into an account under my name only. Today, if possible. There was a brief pause. Margaret, is everything all right? No, I said. But it will be. She asked no further questions. By 10 o'clock that morning, the check was deposited into a new individual account that only I could access. I also called a lawyer. Her name is Susan, and a colleague from school had used her 3 years ago for a property dispute. I explained the situation plainly. Without drama, she listened carefully and said, Do not sign any joint transfer documents. And come see me this week. I made the appointment for Thursday. Daniel brought up the investment at lunch. He had printed something out, a page of numbers and projections with Victor's company letterhead at the top. He set it on the table between us while I was eating my sandwich. I've been thinking, he said, that we should move quickly. Victor says the window really does close soon. I looked at the paper without touching it. I'd like to have my own advisor look at it first. Daniel's smile flickered, just slightly. Patricia won't understand the structure. This is different from traditional investing. Then it should be easy to explain, I said, and took another bite of my sandwich. He picked up the paper. He changed the subject to the weather. That evening, Christopher found me in the garden. I was pulling weeds, which I always do when I need to think. He crouched down beside me without being asked. Mum, he said quietly. I kept pulling weeds. Dad showed me the paperwork last week, he said. He asked me to co-sign on something as a witness. I didn't know what it was exactly. I sat back on my heels and looked at him. I looked Victor up last night, Christopher said. He was staring at the dirt. After I heard you on the phone this morning. What did you find? I asked. Even though I already knew. Nothing good. He looked up at me, and he looked like the little boy who had broken my mother's ceramic rooster when he was 9 years old, ashamed and uncertain and hoping I still loved him. Mum, I didn't know it was like this. Dad made it sound like an opportunity, like something we were doing for the family. I know, I said. Are you angry at me? I thought about it honestly. Not at you, but I need you to understand something. That money is not family money. I earned it. 35 years of lesson plans and parent-teacher conferences and buying supplies out of my own pocket. That house was paid for mostly with my income. That check has my name on it because I put my life into it. Christopher was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, What are you going to do? I pulled one more weed and set it aside. I'm already doing it. That night at dinner, Daniel asked again about the transfer. He was patient about it, almost careful, the way a person is patient when they believe the answer is eventually going to go their way. I've moved the funds, I told him. He looked up. Into the joint account? No, I said. Into a private account. The fork in his hand went still. Margaret, I heard you, I said, calmly, the same voice I used with second graders who had decided to test me. Last week, in the kitchen, you and Christopher, you said I would sign before Friday and never know the difference. The colour in his face changed. Christopher, sitting across the table, looked at his plate. Daniel set down his fork. You misunderstood. Daniel, I said. I've been married to you for 31 years. I know the difference between a misunderstanding and a plan. The kitchen went very quiet. He tried 3 more times over the next hour. He said I was overreacting. He said Victor was legitimate. He said I was being paranoid, that this was an insult to his judgment, that after everything he had done for this family I was going to throw away a real opportunity over nothing. Each time, I said the same thing. I've already protected the money. The conversation about Victor is finished. Finally, he said, Victor needs this investment confirmed by tomorrow or he gives the slot to someone else. Then someone else will be very lucky, I said. He stood up and walked out of the kitchen. Christopher stayed behind. He looked at me with tired eyes. Dad really believes in Victor, he said quietly. He's not doing this to hurt you. I know that, I said. But believing in something doesn't make it real, and good intentions don't protect us from consequences. The next morning, Daniel called Victor from the back porch. I could hear the conversation through the window I had opened earlier. She moved the money, Daniel said. I don't know yet. She won't tell me which account. A pause. I understand that. Another pause. And his voice dropped lower. Give me until the end of the week. I stepped away from the window. My heart was steady, but something cold had moved through my chest. The end of the week. He was still trying. That afternoon I sat down across from Susan in her office. She had short grey hair and reading glasses on a chain, and she looked like the kind of person who had seen everything twice. I laid out everything I knew. She took notes without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "The company you've described has the structure of an affinity fraud. They target people with recent liquidity events. The joint transfer document your husband asked about would have given him full authority over the funds. You would have had no legal recourse once you signed." Legal recourse. I turned that phrase over in my mind. Against my own husband. "What are my options?" I asked. "Right now your money is protected," she said. "If he attempts to pressure you further, or if this escalates, we document everything. If Victor's company has already defrauded others, there may be a case to bring to authorities." She looked at me over her glasses. "But I want to be clear with you, Margaret. Even without a criminal element, what your husband attempted to do without your knowledge or consent is a serious breach of financial trust in a marriage." I nodded slowly. "What do you want the outcome to be?" she asked. I looked out her office window at the street below. An ordinary Thursday afternoon. People walking dogs. A child on a bicycle. "I want the truth," I said. "All of it." That evening, I called Victor's number myself. Daniel didn't know I had found it. Victor answered on the second ring. His voice was warm and practiced, the voice of someone who sells things for a living. He introduced himself before I could, which told me he had my name on his caller ID and had already run through a script in his head. "Mrs. Harlow," he said, "I'm so glad you called. Daniel has told me so much about you." "I'm sure he has," I said. "I want to ask you a few questions." "Of course. Absolutely. 3 people have complained to the Better Business Bureau about your company," I said. "A woman in Ohio lost $60,000 in 2024 and documented it in detail on a public forum. Your company was registered 18 months ago and your name does not appear in any registered investment advisor database." I paused. "I'd like to hear your explanation." The warmth in his voice disappeared so fast it was almost impressive. "Those are false claims made by people who—" "I've already moved the funds," I said. "There is nothing for you here. I'm asking you now, politely, not to contact my husband further." A long silence. "Mrs. Harlow," he said, his voice now flat and cold, "your husband made a commitment." "My husband made a commitment with money that was never his to commit," I replied. "Good night, Victor." I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I was smiling. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote down everything about that call. Time, date, what he said. Susan had told me to document everything. Daniel came home an hour later. He had been at Victor's office, he said. I could tell from his face before he spoke that something had gone wrong for him. "You called Victor?" he said. "I did. Margaret, that was. I told him the money was protected and asked him not to contact you further." I folded my hands on the table. "Daniel, sit down." He sat. "Tell me the truth," I said. "How long have you been planning this?" He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked at the window. And then, finally, he looked at me. 3 months, he said quietly. 3 months. While I was grading papers and calling parents and eating dinner beside him every night. "Victor approached me at a conference," he said. "He showed me everything. I know what you found online, but those complaints are from people who didn't follow the process correctly. I believed it was real, Margaret. I still believe it. You believed in it enough to plan to move my money without telling me," I said. He closed his eyes. "I thought you would say no." "I would have said no," I said, "because it's a scam. You don't know that." I slid the printed BBB complaints across the table. He looked at the papers. He didn't speak for a long time. Christopher walked in from the living room. He had been home all afternoon. He sat down beside his father without being asked. "Dad," he said. I looked it up too. "Mum's right. Victor is not legitimate." Daniel stared at the papers. "I need you to hear me," I said. "I am not angry that you wanted to find us a good investment. I understand that, but you planned to move money that I worked 35 years for without my knowledge, without my consent, without even the basic respect of asking me. You told our son that I would never know the difference." I felt my voice steady itself. "That is not a mistake. That is a choice." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I was doing this for us. No, I said gently. You were doing this for yourself. Because you have always felt like my career made you smaller. Because when people at parties talked about my pension and my salary, you got quiet. Because this house sold for more than anything you've ever brought in, and that has been eating at you. The silence that followed was the longest of our marriage. Christopher sat very still. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it, then said, in a voice I had not heard from him before, "That's not fair." "Is it true?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment, and then something shifted in his face. Something that had been held tight for years. "Yes," he said. He said it like it hurt to let it out. "Yes, it's true." I had expected that answer, but it still landed heavily. 31 years, I said quietly. You could have told me that. Any of those 31 years. How? He said. How do you tell your wife that her success makes you feel like you failed? Christopher looked at his father like he was seeing him for the first time. You come to me, I said. You sit at this table and you say exactly that. What you don't do is wait until I have money in my hand and try to take it. We sat there in the kitchen for a long time after that, not arguing, not crying, just sitting with the weight of 31 years of things left unsaid. The next morning I went to the police station, not in anger, but because Susan had advised me to file a formal report about Victor before he found another target. The detective I spoke with was a woman about 10 years younger than me. She listened to everything. She looked at the complaints I had printed, the notes from my call with Victor, the timeline I had written down. We've had 2 other reports about this individual in the last year, she said. Your documentation is very helpful. I felt something solid settle inside me when I walked back out to my car. I had not known what I was doing when I started writing things down. I had just remembered that evidence matters. 35 years of documentation, of parent notes, and incident reports and grade records, had taught me that. That evening Daniel asked to talk. We sat on the back porch, where we had sat on summer evenings for the 11 years we had lived in that house. The yard was getting dark. A neighbor's sprinkler was running. I've been thinking about what you said, he told me. I waited. I've been carrying this for a long time, he said. The feeling of being behind you. I convinced myself the Victor situation was about helping us. But you were right. It was about me trying to finally feel like I had done something. I know, I said. I almost cost you everything. Yes, I said. You almost did. He was quiet for a moment. Are you going to leave? I looked at the darkening yard, at the rose bushes I had planted 6 years ago, at the bird feeder Christopher had given me for Mother's Day that still hung from the oak tree. I don't know yet, I said. I need time to think. And I need you to get help. Real help. Not to save the marriage necessarily, but because you have been carrying something heavy for a very long time and it led you somewhere you never should have gone. He nodded. He did not argue. Christopher came outside and sat with us without being asked. For a while, nobody said anything. It was not a comfortable silence, but it was an honest one. The following week, Daniel made an appointment with a counselor. He went without being reminded. He came home from the first session quieter and somehow lighter at the same time. Victor did not contact either of us again. 2 months later, I received a call from the detective. Victor had been charged in connection with a fraud case involving several other investors in 3 states. My documentation had been included in the filing. Christopher found a new apartment and moved out in the spring. Before he left, he sat with me at the kitchen table one last time and said, "Mom, I should have asked more questions when Dad came to me." "Yes," I said. "You should have. I'm sorry. I know you are," I said. "And I forgive you. But Christopher, you are 24 years old. You are going to face situations where someone you love asks you to do something because they say it's for the family. And you need to learn to ask the hard questions anyway, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable." He looked at me the way he used to when he was small, and I had explained something that was going to stay with him. "How did you know what to do?" he asked. "When you heard them talking, how did you know not to just fall apart?" I thought about that. "I sat on the front steps and I counted to 11, I said. And then I decided that being 63 years old did not mean I was done. It meant I had 35 years of experience that nobody could take from me. Not Daniel, not Victor, not anyone. He hugged me longer than he had in years. In April, I did something I had been thinking about since before the closing. I booked a trip to the Oregon coast. 10 days. A small rental cottage. No itinerary. Just mornings with coffee and the sound of the ocean and books I had been saving. The night before I left, I stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the room that had held so many years of ordinary and extraordinary things. School lunches packed before sunrise, Christopher's birthday cakes, long evenings with the news on and papers to grade, the kitchen where two people had made a plan around my back, and the kitchen where I had sat across from those same two people and asked for the truth. It was the same kitchen, but I was not the same woman. I had spent 35 years teaching children that their voices mattered, that they had the right to take up space, that asking a hard question was never something to be ashamed of. I had believed that for every child who sat in my classroom, I had simply forgotten to believe it for myself. The cottage on the Oregon coast was small and quiet, and smelled like salt and pine. I woke up the first morning before 6, made coffee, and sat on the small wooden deck watching the light come up over the water. Nobody needed anything from me. No papers waited. No appointments. I was 63 years old, and I had $850,000 in an account that only I could touch, and a lawyer who knew my name, and a detective who had used my documentation to help stop a man from hurting anyone else. And I was sitting in the morning light with coffee in my hands, thinking that this, right here, was something I had earned completely. Not because the money was mine, but because I had chosen not to be afraid, not of losing, not of confronting, not of sitting across from my husband of 31 years and telling him the exact true thing, even when it hurt both of us. I thought about the women I knew who had stayed silent in situations that deserved words, who had signed things without reading them, who had believed that being loved meant being trusted, and that being trusted meant not asking questions. I had almost been one of those women. I had come within 40 minutes of walking through that front door with a check in my hand and no idea what was waiting for me. But I had walked into the house and heard the truth instead, and I had sat on the front steps and counted to 11. If there is something I want you to take from my story, it is this. Your instincts are not paranoia. When something feels wrong, you are allowed to stop. You are allowed to call the bank before you call your husband. You are allowed to see a lawyer before you sign anything. You are allowed to ask the hard question even when the person on the other side of the table is someone you have loved for decades. Age does not make you slow. It makes you experienced. Those are not the same thing. And no one, not a husband, not a son, not a charming voice on the other end of a phone, gets to decide what happens to the years you spent building your life. That was always yours. It still is. If this story stayed with you, if you have ever felt like someone was counting on you not to notice, please take a moment to like it, leave a comment about what you would have done, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. And strength, real strength, does not come from the balance in your account. It comes from knowing exactly who you are when everything is suddenly at stake. I finally remembered who I was, and I hope you never forget who you are.